Hey guys, welcome back. This is a story about what if Naruto befriended Kurama early. After a life-changing event, Naruto meets Kurama early and they become partners and even good friends. With a better outlook on life, he meets many who want to join him and help achieve their dreams and goals together. Among those friends are many beautiful women. Realize just how important he is to them. Before we start, thank you for all of the support. It really means a lot to me. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and leave a like. You can suggest a Naruto fanfiction with a link in the comments if you want me to read it, and check the description for the creator of this great fanfic and support them for making this fanfic. So let's start. Warning. This story will contain mature language, sexual themes, and graphic depictions of violence and gore. Disclaimer. I do not own Naruto or any of its characters. Chapter 13. 10 girls and a boy. 1 week after beginning of final academy year, Naruto and friends were sitting quietly in a classroom awaiting their new instructor, Yumino Iruka. To most observers, it looked like a normal classroom full of obedient students silently waiting on their sensei to begin their lessons for the day. However, a more keen eye would notice that nearly all the students in the room were fidgeting slightly with nervous expressions. It was easy to feel the palpable tension slowly rising in the air by the second. They were awaiting Naruto's hazing of the new instructor like he had been doing at the beginning of every year since entering the academy. He always unleashed his pranks exactly a week after the start of each year to test the person. So far, no instructor survived the hazing intact, and the classmates wondered if Iruka was the one to do it. They were able to determine already that he was a capable and sharp shinobi from the past week under his instructions. Naruto was sitting up several rows in the center of the classroom, leaning back and balancing his chair on its rear legs. His feet were propped up on his desk with his hands interlocked behind his head in a relaxed manner. He was smiling lazily, as if he didn't have a care in the world. "Oi, what are you planning for Iruka-sensei?" Inuzuka Kiba called out from the front row, his voice tinged with some nervousness. His small white ninkin, Akamaru, whined with some discomfort as well from atop the Inuzuka hare's head. "Don't worry, I won't be using fleas this time. Sorry again about last year, I didn't think they'd get on you guys that far from Toki-sensei." Naruto replied, but an amused smirk showed he wasn't that sorry. "I feel loads better," Kiba retorted sarcastically. "I just noticed you failed to mention there won't be collateral this time. Why make promises I'm not sure I can keep?" Naruto replied with an obvious fox-like expression. At that reply, everyone in the classroom tensed as they became alert for anything, including the usually brooding Sasuke. Two small and slender hands lightly swatted Naruto on both sides of his head. It didn't make him flinch, though. He slowly shifted his eyes to the right to find a fuming platinum blonde, and then to the left to see a slightly glaring pair of pale eyes. "That collateral had better not include me," Yamanaka Ino muttered with narrowed eyes. "Naruto-kun, you shouldn't scare our classmates," Hyuga Hinata admonished gently. "Come on, girls, you know me. My pranks don't hurt people. Too much." Naruto whispered the last two words, but they heard them clearly. This earned the blonde a growl from Ino and a glare more powerful than the famous Hyuga glare from Hinata. Her patented Hinata glare finally forced him to raise his hands in a weak defense. "For someone as sweet as you, your expression right now is scarier than the rest of your clan combined," Naruto quipped with a half grin. Hinata smirked slightly, somewhat proud she had some reign on whom she knew to be the most powerful person in her age group. "Do I scare you too?" Ino cut in with the same prideful smirk. "Not really. It's par for the course from you, like it's been for years. It's quite refreshing, actually. It means I'm gonna have a normal day," Naruto retorted with a faux cheerful smile to his fellow blonde, who was now trembling dangerously with her long hair shadowing her eyes. "That man speaks the truth." Shikamaru's voice drawled lazily somewhere from the back of the classroom. "Ru-tu." Ino growled threateningly with a throbbing vein on her temple, and was about to dispense some horrific violence on him for his sass when the trio heard an imitation of a whip being cracked. They all glanced over at Kiba to see him making whipping motions. The rest of the class sniggered as the girls blushed lightly at the teasing. Naruto just laughed monotonously. "Ha ha. That's funny coming from a clan heir so whipped by his mom and sister he might as well check if he grew a vagina yet. He mocked with a smirk. That remark earned him a growl and a middle finger from the Inuzuka clan heir along with more swats on the head from the two heiresses. I always knew he's dickless. An extremely pale and emotionless black-haired boy, dressed in all black and sitting in the last row, interjected in an even and monotone voice. Kiba growled with a comically angry tick on his head, looking like he would tear apart the next person who insulted him. Would you stop that, Sai? What's with you and your fixation on that part of men? Sakura called out from her seat next to Sasuke with an angry and embarrassed blush on her cheeks. Sai turned his emotionless gaze toward the pink-haired girl. I apologize for inadvertently making you fantasize about the Uchiha's male anatomy, even though I'm convinced he's more likely to be dickless than Inuzuka-san. What? How dare you? She growled as she got to her feet and raised a fist in a threatening manner. Sasuke developed a constant eye twitch while somehow managing to remain still in his brooding pose, despite his overwhelming desire to throttle the pale-skinned boy. Naruto was still surprised, even now, that Ino didn't rise to the Uchiha's defense like her pink-haired friend. Instead, she actually snickered quietly. She hadn't been paying much attention to the raven-haired teen for months now, and he had to admit he liked this change in her. It was like he was slowly getting all of his first friend ever back since she began dividing her attention between him and Sasuke several years ago. To think all it took was an intervention on his part. He shook it off, not wanting to remember that painful, yet rewarding, day. Instead, he thought back to when Sai was suddenly introduced to the class as a transfer last week. He and the rest of his classmates found this odd, especially when the pale boy's odd and emotionless mannerisms came out right away. It didn't take the blonde long to realize that Sai might have been inserted into the class by Shimura Danzo, considering what he learned about that paranoid war hawk from Jiraiya last summer. The only question at this point was if the insertion had something to do with the Jinchuriki, or the last Uchiha. Naruto shook that thought off as well, figuring he'd likely get his answer over the coming year, and refocused on the dialogue still going on. He has almost all the females our age, and even some older ones, falling over themselves at his feet, and he hadn't given any a second look. You have a better chance of becoming a raging lesbian than getting a date from him, Howler Monkey. Sai retorted in the same monotone before finishing with a painfully fake smile. Sakura was so startled by such a straightforward insult that she just sputtered and sat down to let her brain reboot. Meanwhile, the whole class was chuckling at the exchange, until Naruto suddenly stopped as he flinched. Clone outside just dispelled. Iruka-sensei's coming. He whispered as he set his chair back down on all four legs, but still retained his relaxed posture. The girls sighed and decided to just let the scene play out. Ino was used to his behavior for years and knew she could never change that part of him, and wouldn't try it anyway because it was usually funny and endearing to her. The polite and proper part of Hinata did not approve of her future lover's hazing of their sensei, but her rebellious part, though small, found it quite thrilling. She wasn't able to cause too much trouble outside her clan's compound because she had to uphold the Hyuga clan's reputation as its heiress to a degree. Because of that, she sometimes found herself living vicariously through his pranking ways. Everyone in the classroom fidgeted in anticipation as they heard footsteps growing louder outside the door until they suddenly stopped. In the deafening silence that followed, the usually quiet sliding door sounded like rough stones grating loudly against each other as it slowly slid open to show a bored-looking Yumino Iruka gazing down at a clipboard. Naruto smirked as he twitched his left ring finger slightly, pulling a nearly invisible wire taut. Oh whoops. Dropped my pen. Iruka innocently muttered as he practically threw the item down to the floor, before crouching down to pick it up. At that exact moment, a hidden modified exploding tag on the doorframe burst into a small spray of pink paint, passing through the space Iruka's head was occupying just an instant ago and right onto the unsuspecting face of Mizuki, who was following behind his superior into the classroom. The sky blue-haired assistant instructor let out a yelp as he clutched at his now pink face with both hands. Meanwhile, Iruka straightened up and continued, ignoring the commotion behind him as he resumed writing on his clipboard. Raising an eyebrow in intrigue, Naruto twitched his left middle finger this time. The scarred man made a sharp left turn toward a student sitting in the front row with a pleasant smile. Meanwhile, a filled balloon dropped from a hidden spot in the ceiling right under the spot Iruka sidestepped. However, the balloon still found a target as the temporarily distracted Mizuki stumbled right underneath it. It burst on impact to cover him completely in a white powder, and he let out a strained cry as he began itching frantically all over his body. Meanwhile, Iruka was speaking with a student in the front row, oblivious to his assistant's suffering as Mizuki continued to itch all over frantically in vain and slumped to the floor with increasingly frustrated grunts. Iruka, having finished speaking, then turned and moved toward his desk in the corner. Naruto had to hold in a chuckle as he made a discreet signal. On that cue, a meow was heard from an open windowsill next to the desk. All students glanced over at the source to see a mischievous-looking black cat on the sill meowing and rubbing against the window frame as it seemed to be presenting itself as a tempting target for a certain animal. Any observant person, like Shikamaru, would note its deep blue eyes and suspicious-looking white marks shaped like a certain blonde's whiskers adorning its cheeks. The temptation worked as barking and growling were heard from Kiba's dog, Akamaru. Before the Inuzuka heir could restrain his partner, the dog suddenly leapt off his companion's head and ran in a straight line toward the open window, barking and growling all the way. The black cat meowed mockingly one last time before disappearing outside. As the ninkin was making his way across the classroom, he scrambled across Mizuki's body before doing a chakra-powered leap right off the poor assistant's crotch, making him cry out sharply and whimper in a new world of pain, having successfully forgotten about the itching in favor of this new hell. In the air, the puppy's flight trajectory would have intersected with Iruka's head as he continued on his path to the desk. All the students tensed up as it seemed a collision was imminent. Ah, such a nasty crick in my neck. I'll have to see a medic about this soon. The scarred man grumbled as he exaggeratedly stretched his neck to the side, allowing Akamaru to sail through the air unimpeded right out the window. Oi, you bastard. I'll get you back for this later. Kiba growled over his shoulder at a certain blonde as he followed Akamaru out the window while Iruka moved around the desk to sit down. A smirk grew on Naruto's face as he twitched his index finger to launch the last trap he set up. This released 3 hidden spring-loaded traps, shooting out a blunt-edged shuriken each. All 3 shuriken flew from different angles toward the oblivious-looking instructor as he sat down fully. Iruka then let out a yawn, his left arm stretching upward before blurring in different directions for half a second before going back to its original outstretched position, this time holding the 3 shuriken D-fly between his fingers. He pretended to blink in surprise before bringing his hand down to inspect the shuriken. Oh, how did these get into my hand? He innocently mumbled as the entire class, except the still smirking Naruto, watched in stunned silence. His hand then blurred for an instant and it was empty. Whoops. It slipped, he said in monotone as the 3 shuriken embedded themselves loudly into the front wooden panel of a desk sitting a row up and directly behind Naruto, framing the unflinching blonde's head. Most of the classes let out a gasp of surprise. Meanwhile, Hinata was about to unleash her patented glare upon Iruka for daring to risk hurting Naruto before the blonde put a hand on her shoulder to distract her. She glanced over to see him also restraining a visibly irritated Ino from speaking up, likely with choice obscenities for the scarred man. No worries. It was just an accident. Right, Iruka-sensei. Naruto calmly spoke with that knowing smirk, while Hinata blushed slightly at the expression and the sensation of his strong and warm hand on her shoulder. She didn't notice Ino doing the same. Iruka smirked and gave a jerk of his head in a lazy nod. Inside his head was a different story, however. That kid didn't even flinch. I held back, but an academy student should have turned into a whimpering heap at such a close call. He must have gotten some training. Oh well, I'll think about that later. Okay, quiet. Time to get started for the day. He called out to the class, ignoring the trembling and groaning heap of Mizuki next to his desk. Meanwhile, Naruto was deep in his own thoughts as well. Thank Kami I got that hellish training from Enko-chan. I would have turned into a whimpering heap otherwise. That won't do for the container of the great Kyuubi no Kitsune. Anyway, I suppose you're about to go all out on this scarred man since he passed your test with flying colors. Kurama spoke from inside her seal with a snicker. Yup. I think this'll be a fun year. The stuff I put up were child's play that I wouldn't be caught dead using otherwise. Time to bring out my big guns and see how he likes it. A cold shiver went through Uruka's body as if he just had the hand of Shinigami pass through him. He had a feeling he should have swallowed his pride and took a couple of hits. He then shook it off. Later one morning in Naruto's apartment, Naruto woke up and stretched with a loud yawn in his bed. Morning sunlight was shining through the bedroom's window with a pleasant warmth. Smacking his lips, he slid out and slipped into the bathroom for a quick shower before getting dressed in casual clothes. He then made himself a breakfast of oatmeal and toast. After eating it all, he let out a contented sigh. It's such a nice day to be off from class, he murmured out loud. He then smiled as he heard his tenant's surprised snort. Wah. Huh. Oi. Why the hell did you wake me up? I was having a pleasant dream chasing after rabbits my size. Kurama grumbled. I thought that was the case when you fell asleep before I left the mindscape last night. Your legs were twitching as if you were running, he thought with an amused smirk upon remembering such a cute sight. Fuck you. I'm not a dog, damn it. The demon fox growled as she stretched and let out a loud earth-shaking yawn. Anyway, so what's on the agenda for today? You do recall I asked you to stop training for the day. You've earned some rest. I suppose I'll terrorize the population like usual. Naruto could feel the fox grinning sinisterly at that statement. He then got up to go back into the bedroom and stood in front of a full-length mirror. He then put up a half-ram hand sign and concentrated before his body was completely enveloped in smoke. What Kurama saw in the mirror when it cleared away made her smirk excitedly. I happen to know who's out of the village for the day, Naruto announced out loud in his new disguise's voice. Next day at Uruka's apartment, Yumino Uruka stretched out his arms and legs after he just stepped out of his small apartment. He groaned as he still felt somewhat sluggish, since he had returned late last night from an abrupt one-day mission to a nearby village. Grumbling at the fact that he still got missions despite being a full-time sensei at the academy, he made his way out of the apartment building. He then decided to take a leisurely stroll through the streets of Konoha before stopping at the Hokage's office to drop off the mission report on the way to class. As he turned a corner, he accidentally bumped into a woman and instinctively reached an arm out around her waist to steady her. I'm so sorry. I wasn't watching where I was going, ma'am. Are you all right? He tried to keep calm as he awaited any reply. The woman, who had her hands on the man's chest, glanced up at his face and he was surprised to see it was Haruno Sake, mother of one of his students, Sakura. The woman's shoulder-length pink hair tied up into a short ponytail and her sharp emerald eyes were dead giveaways. To add to her incredible beauty, she was dressed in a tight white blouse with a red floral pattern of sakura petals that showed the curves of her shapely B-cup breasts and flat stomach. To finish her outfit off, she wore a loose white skirt that went midway down to her knees, showing off her long and unblemished legs with a cute pair of white casual sandals adorning her small feet. Uruka had to fight down a blush standing so close to such a desirable woman. It's quite alright, Saki's eyes widened upon recognizing Uruka. Uruka-sensei, it's you. I was hoping to find you after yesterday, she finished in a warm and friendly manner. Uruka swore she seemed to be almost pressing her amazing body up against him. Yesterday. Haruno-san, I'm afraid he tried to explain. Nonsense. You don't have to apologize. I'll admit the way you came up to me, held my hands so softly, and talked sweet nothings to me was surprising at first. You even dipped me in front of everyone in the middle of the street and whispered some naughty stuff into my ear before disappearing. Sake blushed on the last statement as she remembered what was said to her. Uruka was so bewildered by her story that he almost didn't notice the pink-haired woman press her moderate but shapely breasts tightly into his chunin vest as she continued. However, you made a widow like me feel something I haven't felt in years, and that's to be wanted. She spoke in a somewhat breathy voice with a mischievous twinkle in her half-lidded eyes. She slowly slid her hands still on his chest up to wrap her arms around Uruka's neck. She then gently pulled the stunned man in close to leave 3 butterfly kisses along the scarred man's jawline, making him shiver pleasantly. She then slowly let go of the blushing man, although she seemed reluctant to do it. I have to get to work. I hope we'll meet soon and discuss my daughter's progress in your class, among other things. She whispered the last word in a husky tone as she trailed a fingertip along the man's recently kissed jawline before almost skipping off. She then disappeared around another corner with a flirty wave. Uruka stood still, completely frozen, for about 5 minutes before he seemed to reboot. What just happened? He muttered to no one in particular as he found himself alone on this empty street. He raised a hand to rub gently alongside his jawline and another blush adorned his cheeks. He wondered if she mistook him for someone else before his lips then broke into a small smile. Whatever will happen, I'll explain myself next time we meet. Though I wouldn't mind seeing her again in a more personal setting. I've always thought of her as a beautiful but quiet woman, but for her to be like that. Haruka trailed off as a somewhat perverted grin crept its way onto his face before he continued walking, shaking off the recent development for another time. Soon in the Hokage's office Haruka knocked on the office's door. After hearing, "Enter," he opened the door and stepped in only to stop abruptly in his tracks at the odd look the Hokage was giving him, but shook it off and moved up to the large desk. "Chunin Yumi no Haruka reporting mission complete, Hokage-sama," he announced as he laid a scroll on the flat surface in front of the still suspicious-looking Hokage. "Wait, Haruka-kun, you weren't here yesterday?" the old man inquired carefully. Haruka narrowed his eyes in confusion. "Forgive me, Hokage-sama, but you must have been misinformed. I was out all day yesterday on this mission that you assigned me," he explained, indicating the scroll on the desk with his hand. "It's just that," the third sputtered before realization dawned upon him. He then quickly schooled his features. "Thank you for your hard work and forgive me for the confusion. You may go," he finished with a nod. Haruka thought about pressing for an explanation but decided against it, and left the office. The wizened village leader leaned back in his chair with an annoyed sigh. "That solves everything," he muttered to no one in particular. "It was Naruto-san yesterday, wasn't it?" Yugao's voice called out as she shimmered out of thin air on the office's couch. "I believe so, Naoko-san. I have to admit I thought I was going senile when Haruka-kun walked into the office, stared me in the eyes for 5 minutes without speaking a single word, and then began dancing around like a chicken while screaming unintelligibly. He then dived head first out the window," the third tiredly said as he indicated the specific window with a hand. "I waited with bated breath for 10 minutes to hear any report of an unfortunate suicide before I decided it was a hallucination." The cat-masked woman had to stifle a chuckle as she remembered the strange incident, before she thought of something. That wasn't a regular henge he was using. All of us would have seen through the genjutsu right away. Instead, he was really transformed into Yumino-san with all of his physical characteristics. Something tells me his tenant had something to do with that. It would have been an amazing spying tool, and that was probably why he didn't tell us about that particular effect of his henge. He knew he would have been forced to train only for spying and then sent out, never to set a foot in this village for years. The civilians would have been heartbroken to have to volunteer such a young and sweet boy for such a long and dangerous mission away from here. Yugao muttered sarcastically, alluding to the fact the civilians could have signed their favorite orphan ward up for the spying program without his consent. If the Hokage refused, they would have gone to the daimyo and presented this as evidence that he was playing favorites and not utilizing someone's full potential to protect the village, likely overriding him while damaging his credibility. Not to mention the fact that the Anbu have discovered a disturbing pattern of many of our agents dying suddenly under odd circumstances after several years of spying. It's as if someone didn't want the veteran spies who've accumulated years of damaging information about Konoha to live any longer. Naruto-san might have been in danger of that, she added with a serious tone. I agree there's a good chance of that happening. That's why you, Boar-san, Lion-san, and I are going to conveniently forget the past 5 minutes. The third said nonchalantly, but there was an edge of authority in his tone. Yugao and the other two hidden Anbu replied with a loud, yes, Hokage-sama. On that note, it's time to do some pest control. We've allowed an annoying fly to listen to what we wanted it to hear long enough. This recent information cannot get back to that man. The Hokage said darkly as he released a concentrated blast of his killing intent at a certain spot in the office before his right arm blurred for an instant. There was a muffled thud, then a crash behind Yugao. The still-seated Anbu casually turned her head to see an oddly dressed female Anbu lying in a broken heap among some rubbish in the back corner of the office. The hidden woman apparently fell through the ceiling tiles from above upon being killed. Dark blood was pooling underneath from a kunai embedded up to the handle in her forehead. Her featureless mask had shattered from the kunai to reveal a frozen expression of terror on the young dark-haired woman's face. A large piece of the mask displayed a kanji for the word, root. I thought root agents were trained to have no emotions. She certainly looked very frightened upon being found out. Yugao commented offhandedly as she gestured for one of her colleagues to radio for a cleanup squad. Hiruzen let out a sigh. That idiot ex-teammate of mine is convinced his little private force can successfully infiltrate the main force full of the most talented shinobi I have the honor of commanding. If he keeps this up, not even his political influence with the daimyo court will protect him, and I will personally eliminate him, evidence or not. He could feel smirks forming on his subordinates' faces under the masks. Is there something you'd like to say? He inquired with some amusement. I think I speak for all of us that we were just reminded you're still a full-blooded shinobi instead of a kindly grandfather figure a certain blonde, and most villagers view you as Hokage-sama. Yugao replied with a small bow of respect. The best shinobi in the village do get the big hat, after all. Hiruzen said dismissively with a smirk before continuing. Anyway, enough of this gloomy subject. I hope Iruka-kun finds out he's been impersonated soon. The female Anbu let out a snort. I'm afraid Yumino-san will run into trouble on the way to the academy. She explained upon seeing her superior's inquisitive eyebrow, before continuing. A friend came over last night to chat because she was angry and wanted to vent. Apparently, Naruto-san did something to upset a large group of people yesterday afternoon, and word of it got back to her. She's out for blood this morning, and poor Yumino-san is probably walking right into her this very moment. The third and the other Anbu winced in sympathy for the Chunin instructor. Meanwhile, outside between the Hokage Tower and the academy, Iruka was walking leisurely toward the nearby academy building with the tower behind him. He pushed aside the confusion in the Hokage's office for the moment and thought a bit more about his encounter with Sake earlier. He let a stupid grin form on his lips as he remembered how she gently kissed along his jawline. He was so deep in his thoughts that he nearly jumped out of his skin when a female voice called out, and it was laced with restrained anger. Yumino-san, I suppose that perverted grin was because you were thinking back to how you traumatized those people yesterday. Iruka spun around to stand face to face with an extremely displeased-looking Yuhi Kurenai. Yuhi-san. What are you talking about? He sputtered before a sharp glare interrupted him. Save your excuses. How could you, an upstanding sensei to impressionable children, walk through the streets of this village while loudly reciting passages from those cursed orange books? Exclamation mark. Those streets were filled with young women and men who were now traumatized by Jiraiya's vile creations, the red-eyed Kunoichi snarled. WHWH what? Exclamation mark. That's impossible. I wasn't even he, Iruka tried to calmly explain, but Kurenai wouldn't listen as she blurred through hand signs. This is my best anti-pervert illusion. Enjoy your 30-minute show of Guy and Kakashi making out with each other. His eyes widened in horror as the illusion took hold before he began to scream and fell to the ground, twitching with one last coherent thought. It was that blonde bastard. I just know he had something to do with my day going to hell. As he continued to scream and twitch on the ground while Kurenai stomped off, the aforementioned blonde bastard and his indigo-haired friend were standing on the roof of the academy overlooking what just happened between the two adults. Anyo. Was what Yuhi-san said true? Hinata asked apprehensively of Naruto, who was looking pityingly down at the still screaming Iruka. It's not true. She let relief begin to fill her before it was shattered the next instant. After all, on my way here this morning, I saw most of the people that heard me reciting one of Ero Sennin's books walking out of a bookstore, and they were carrying copies of the same orange book with blushes on their cheeks. They certainly didn't look traumatized to me like Kurenai-san claimed. Naruto cheerfully said with a foxy grin before being bopped on the head by a glaring Hinata. Avoiding the glare, he jumped down to Iruka with his fuming friend following suit. He knelt down next to his sensei's twitching body and pushed the man's Hitai-8 up out of the way to rest a palm on his forehead. Oi, mind helping me dispel the genjutsu please? Of course I don't mind. Forcing someone to see the scarecrow and the green idiot tongue wrestling is an evil I wouldn't wish on anyone but any Uchiha. Kurama shuddered briefly before forcing a small pulse of her chakra through her container's system, which in turn pulsed his own chakra through his hand into Iruka. This was a quicker and more effective method than having to spend a long moment gathering chakra within himself to release it quite forcefully, no thanks to his less than stellar chakra control. This method was enough to disrupt the sensei's chakra pathways for an instant, shattering the horrible illusion of a naked Kakashi and Guy about to decide who was going to be the bottom. He calmed down right away with a sigh of relief, but still out of it for the moment. Sorry, Iruka-sensei. I didn't think Kurenai-san would overreact like that. Naruto murmured before standing up. Hinata-chan, let's go inside. He'll be up in a few minutes, so we might as well wait for class to start. He walked into the building with his friend, leaving behind a relieved Iruka dreaming of a certain pink-haired woman to wash away the horrific illusion he just experienced. Later that night in a hidden base somewhere under Konoha, an oddly dressed Anbu appeared out of thin air, kneeling in front of a heavily bandaged black-haired old man bundled up in a large haori that seemed to be missing his right arm and eye. One of his most distinguishing characteristics beside these was the prominent cross-shaped scar on his chin. They were alone in a barren office that the old man was occupying for the time being. Report. Shimura Danzo commanded in a cold voice. Danzo-sama, Agent 052 is dead. The kneeling root agent reported with no hint of emotion in his voice. The only display of emotion his master showed was a slight twitch of his visible eye. How did it happen? The Hokage terminated her while she was conducting her surveillance in his office. From what I gathered, he did not even bother trying to capture her or give her any chance to surrender. Danzo couldn't control a slight intake of his breath at hearing the circumstances. His lone hand resting on the desk unwittingly clenched into a tight fist for a brief moment. If that's all, you may go. The agent vanished from his sight with no further acknowledgement of his dismissal. Now alone in his office, he let out a small growl of frustration. That accursed monkey. For how long did he know my agent was there? She was the best in stealth out of us, and yet he found her anyway. How much of the information that he allowed to pass through her was for his own benefit and not mine? To hear he mercilessly terminated her without even bothering to try to capture her alive. Danzo felt a small shiver as he was reminded of his ex-teammate's younger, and far more ruthless, self. Yes, I will have to be more careful from now on. He mused to himself as his attention went back to some paperwork on his desk. Even the leader of a secret organization had paperwork to deal with as well. Later, a random alley in Konoha. Naruto was speeding through an alley while laughing like a child. He glanced behind himself to see a squad of 5 Anbu sprinting along the walls and ground as they tried to keep up with the quick blonde. Oi, you might as well give up. Aren't those masks getting a little snug? He called out over his shoulder with an infuriating smirk at the enraged Anbu. You bastard. Putting super glue on the inside of our masks is unforgivable. We'll get you this time. One member of the squad growled as they pushed themselves hard to catch up with him as they continued to speed through alleyways and buildings. After a long chase throughout most of the village that included failed ambushes and traps, it looked like Naruto was going to get away unscathed as his superior acrobatics and stamina once again won over the Anbu. Just as he was about to lose them with a huge victorious smile on his face, he was stopped cold in his track because of an arm sticking out of nowhere to pull a harsh clothesline on him. The blonde let out a choking sound as he swung forward and back once from his neck before the arm wrapped around his head into a tight headlock. Oi. A familiar voice jolted him out of his daze. Why the hell are you causing trouble for the nice Anbu, Naruto? Iruka-sensei. Ow. Naruto yelped as his sensei's arm tightened even more and was conked on the top of his head with the other hand. The Anbu that were chasing Naruto came to a full stop, staring at the scene in surprise. Apologize right now for the trouble you caused them. Iruka growled as he dug his knuckles in painfully. Oh ow. Okay. Stop that. I'll apologize. I'm really sorry, nice Anbu people. Naruto yelled out as he struggled to get away from the noogie he was retrieving. The Anbu continued to watch this scene in silence as the scarred man released their blonde nemesis. That'll do. As punishment, I'm making you clean the classroom today. No argument. Iruka said sternly before Naruto could complain. The sensei then sent the grumbling blonde on the way to the academy. He then smiled nervously as he turned toward the Anbu squad and bowed. I apologize for my students' behavior. You should go see a medic nin for help in removing your masks. Good luck, he calmly said before he also walked off toward the academy. After a long moment of silence, one of the Anbu turned to the others. So, am I alone in feeling like an asshat after watching one normal Chunin manhandle that blonde bastard as if it was nothing? The others shook their heads, and they all sighed in dejection before heading off to find ways to remove their masks. Later one day at the dango shop. You know, Kurama, I've been thinking. Naruto lazily thought as he was people watching from his seat at a patio table outside the dango shop. He took a stick of dango into his mouth to begin munching on each ball. Better be careful with that. We wouldn't want you to burn the few brain cells you have in your skull. Kurama retorted with a snicker. He allowed an annoyed tick on his temple before ignoring the insult. I've been watching these people for a while and now, as much as I hate to say this, I think Ero Sennin is right. Oh my kami. The great Uzumaki Naruto admitted another person is right. And it's the old pervert of all people. Kurama exclaimed in mock shock before laughing. You're annoying, damn fox. Anyway, I've noticed most men in the crowd always seem to stare at the most attractive women in the vicinity at the moment, despite the fact that some of them were with their girlfriends or wives. Naruto replied with a smirk at remembering seeing the unfaithful men getting into trouble when their women caught them red-handed. So you're admitting that old pervert was right when he said that most of the men are perverts, openly or not. I could have told you that a long time ago from my thousands of years observing humans. You're one of them too. Oi. I'm not. Naruto tried to defend himself before his face exploded into a bright shade of red upon seeing an image pushed into his mind by Kurama. Oh really, my oh so pure and innocent container. So who was the one who's been asking to see my highly detailed memory of a certain wet and naked purple-haired beauty every other week? Kurama retorted with a victorious and toothy grin, knowing she caught Naruto. Naruto sighed and conceded that point. I won't be open about it like Ero Sennin is, at least. Anyway, what do you think of me coming up with an anti-pervert jutsu? Something like Kurenai-san's scary genjutsu, only with the solid henge in my case. That may actually work in many cases. Unless a man trains himself extensively to be resistant to a woman's charm, he would be surprised if you spring something like this on him suddenly and a split-second distraction could make a difference. Others will call this a moronic jutsu, but this will be useful in some cases such as infiltration and seduction, if you ever have to go down that path. Ew, I hope not. No matter what, I'm not going to let any guy get anywhere close to kissing me, let alone go beyond that. Anyway, looks like I'll be spending today figuring out the perfect body for this then. I'll need reference materials. Naruto concluded as he paid his bill and jumped up to the rooftops. Making his way to a nearby bookstore, he then henged into a plain-looking adult civilian before jumping down to the ground. He casually walked into the store and quickly found the adult section. As Naruto grabbed a copy each of all the available volumes in his Godfather's Ika series, much to his tenant's delight, he came across some magazines full of what he thought to be attractive women in various poses and different states of undress. As he was making his way to the sales counter, he overheard something that made his blood boil. Yeah, so I hear that snake whore and her hot friend usually go to the drunk cage every Friday. How about we go over to that bar tonight and try get into their panties? I'm sure if we wave a wad of cash around that snake bitch, she'll be too happy to do whatever we want and her hot friend may follow suit. A slimy-looking man leered with his two equally unsavory friends in one of the store's aisles. His eye twitching, the disguised Naruto slowly made his way behind the boasting slime. He then opened one of the magazines in his arms to a rather intriguing picture of a woman posing and then tossed it in the air. The slime's two friends immediately looked up in the air as their eyes hungrily followed the flying porn magazine. The slime, since he was facing them with the magazine flying behind him, was confused at this reaction. While the two men were distracted, Naruto discreetly kicked at the back of the slime's knee. It made the man fall to his knee with a small gasp of surprise while his two friends were still looking up in the air. Naruto then seemed to be innocently walking past the group of men, his stiff arm shoving the kneeling man's head hard sideways into one of the aisle's shelves. The man's forehead conked against the metal shelf loudly before he sank to the floor, unconscious for a long while to come. This all happened so fast, and when the man's two friends returned their attention to their friend at the sudden noise, they thought he just fell and hit his head. They went to his side, forgetting about the disguised boy that seemed to be nonchalantly walking by. That'll teach that asshole. You do realize that if they were stupid enough to actually try hitting on those two females, they will suffer a fate worse than death itself. I know. Still wouldn't stop me from wanting to defend my friend's honor, and I at least made sure the pretty ladies will have one less group of men bothering them tonight. Naruto explained as he made his way to the sales counter to pay for his reference materials. A disgusted glare from the female sale clerk didn't bother him as he left the store. Later in the afternoon at his apartment, all right. I've looked through them all. Naruto declared with a huge blush on his cheeks as he sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the porn magazines he purchased lying open around him. So have you figured out the best physique for your new henge? I'm not so sure. There are a lot of different features I liked when I looked through the magazines. I like small breasts as much I do large ones. I like slender as much as I do curves. It's hard to pick between them all. It'll take me a long while to find the perfect body that most men would pass out upon seeing it. Why not create some clones and have them pick their own favorites and they parade around in their new looks for your judging? Just separate them so they study their magazines on their own and make sure they don't discuss anything with each other. It's worth a try. Naruto decided with a shrug as he stood up to activate his apartment-wide privacy seal. His use of chakra would attract unnecessary attention and he didn't want to have to explain why he had porn magazines lying around his apartment. Putting his hands into a familiar cross-shaped hand seal, he created 10 clones. Alright, minions. Each of you grab a magazine and split up. Do not discuss anything with each other and decide on your own which features make the best body overall. Line up here in 30 minutes and we'll get the show started, he barked, and the clones let out a yell of "Asu" before they picked out their magazines. Naruto then went into the kitchen to cook himself a quick dinner while his clones scrambled to their own studying spots. 30 minutes later, Naruto put his empty plate into the sink and returned to the living room to find all 10 of his clones lined up. Each of you got an image in your head? Naruto inquired, and they all replied with an affirmative. Go ahead and transform. All 10 clones put their right hands up in a half-ram seal, and smoke then enveloped all of them. After it cleared away, Naruto suddenly sported a huge blush and had to work to keep from getting a nosebleed. Standing before him were 10 of the most attractive naked women he ever saw so far. Even Anko and Yugao would be jealous. Phew, even I feel a little hot under my fur seeing them. Naruto raised an eyebrow upon the demon fox's admission, and it was clear the clones somehow heard her compliment because they all blushed. He'd put the new discovery of Kurama being able to communicate mentally with his clones aside for the moment. That's odd coming from you, considering you're a fox, and I might as well just throw in the fact you said you're female on more than one occasion. He deadpanned. Whatever my nature and gender are, assuming I do not appreciate beauty in any form would be wrong, and those 10 are certainly right up there in the beauty department. If there's one thing I would ever say truthfully about you, it's that you have an excellent taste in human women. Naruto thought for a moment before shrugging lazily. This is probably not going to be the strangest thing I would ever hear you say in all of our life together, so I'm just going to roll with this. Naruto concluded before turning a critical eye toward the 10 naked and blushing female clones. He noticed with some amusement that the women, despite being clones of him on the inside, were acting more like bashful maidens the longer they remained naked under his scrutiny. Meanwhile, the clone's general thought process was taking an interesting turn. I hope he picks me since I spent a lot of time thinking on my looks. However, I wonder why I'm suddenly feeling a little uncomfortable having boss looking over us so closely. Is this how all females felt when men were checking them out in public? I think something's wrong with me for thinking this way, but I can't help it. I'm not liking being naked around a male now. Upon looking closely at the clones, Naruto discovered a few similarities between some of them. 7 of them were sporting his blonde hair color in various styles. He particularly liked the hair color for his henge, so he announced at the start that he would be eliminating the 3 clones that weren't blonde, 2 brunettes and 1 black-haired. What? It's clear those 3 are beautiful. How could boss toss them aside without a second thought? They spent a lot of time on trying to impress the boss and he just decides he wanted only blonde hair. Typical man, focusing only on 1 or 2 features instead of the whole picture. I'm going to let boss have it if he keeps this up. Was the current thought process of the female-looking clones now glaring at their creator disapprovingly. Naruto immediately noticed a disturbing pattern developing in the 3 cloned girls being genuinely upset at being eliminated so quickly, and the other 7 clones were looking at him with some annoyance, apparently for being harsh toward their non-blonde companions. It looks like they're taking on more feminine traits, such as a female group's tendency to protect all of their comrades. Are they actually turning into girls on the inside instead of just the exterior? Naruto thought, hoping for an answer from his tenant. That seems to be the case, considering the thoughts I'm hearing from these clones. And I do think you're being a little harsh by cutting these 3 so quickly just because of hair color. They worked so hard coming up with their looks to please their creator, after all. You're joining their side too. Why shouldn't I? I'm female too. You certainly picked the perfect time to actually act like a girl after all this time. I'm going to get this over with before this whole thing become even more fucked up. Naruto muttered mentally as he looked at the 7 remaining girls. He noticed the 3 eliminated girls standing off to the side with dejected expressions. Damn it, even he was feeling a little bad about that. Next, he noticed 4 of them displayed some youth in their features compared to the more mature features of the other 3. He thought the somewhat innocent beauty would appeal to a lot of men, himself included. Based on that, he eliminated another 3 clones. Once again, he dealt with the disappointment of the 3 girls he cut as the other 7 clones not only became more annoyed, but also got vocal in defending their female companions. He had to deal with some grumblings from the peanut gallery on the side, and in his head too, with the demon fox putting in her own opinion too. He was sorely tempted to dispel all of them this minute, but he wanted to complete this version of his henge. He found one clone's curly and naturally tousled shoulder-length hair to be interesting. Another clone's short bob was something he didn't think of either. However, he decided he wanted long hair for his henge, so he cut the short-haired pair, despite the other clones and Fox's growing discontent. Apparently they believed the curly-haired clone to be the most beautiful of the group, even the ones that remained in the running. Ignoring the revolting clones and Fox, he checked out the last 2 clones closely. One had silky and straight hair done up in twin pigtails, and the second had long, alluring, and radiant waist-length curly hair. He liked both of the styles equally, and their faces looked almost identical down to the whisker marks, so he looked at their bodies closely. The curly-haired clone was petite at 5 feet with a slender frame that had shapely teardrop-shaped B-cup breasts that did not seem small at all in proportion to the rest of the body. Light pink areola and nipples adorned the impressive breasts. He also noted the somewhat wide hips as they stood out due to the clone's slender shape. Turning to the twin pigtailed clone, he felt the clone's body looked somewhat familiar. It was taller than the other clone by 6 inches and carried more mass than the other clone's slender body with well-toned muscles all over and wide hips. The butt was well-rounded and plump, looking like a very tempting place to smack. The legs were long and shapely. The C-cup breasts, bordering on D, were very perky with small dark red nipples, and they looked to be a perfect fit for the clone's larger body. He then came to realize that this clone used the image of Enko's incredible body from that day in the hot spring. The clone apparently took that in, because Naruto did not catch the sight of Enko's front that day, added what it believed to be the perfect pair of breasts to Enko's amazing body and recreated it in its own image. Naruto always did find Enko extremely attractive, and he enjoyed her unique personality. Feeling a connection to the purple-haired woman in this clone's image, despite its own modification of using a darker tan, long blonde hair done up in twin pigtails, and more softer facial features, he made his decision. Meanwhile, the fuming clone's general thought process was focused solely on branding Naruto as a male chauvinist pig, and daring him to be a typical male and pick the one with the bigger breasts. The fox, having understood Naruto's thought process for what it really was, decided to give him a break. It didn't mean she would stop teasing her container, since she was going to let the clones draw their own misunderstood conclusion about their creator and play along. Letting out a sigh, knowing what would come when he made his choice, Naruto pointed at the twin pigtailed clone. Alright, I'll go with this one. Of course you would pick the one with the big breasts. The clones, including the winner, and the fox chorused in perfect harmony. Whatever you want to think. I can't believe I'm having my own clones act like real girls and turning against me over this. Not to mention you suddenly becoming girly, Kurama. This has been a really weird evening. The only male in the apartment muttered. Now that it's over with, I'm gonna get rid of you and I'm going to forget about this whole damn thing. He was preparing to dispel the clones when he heard knocking at the front door. Forgetting about the current situation for the moment, he walked over and pulled the door open to reveal Yumino Iruka. Hello, Naruto. I thought I'd make a quick stop here and see how you're doing with your home life. Can I come in? The sensei greeted with a wave. Naruto suddenly had a nagging feeling he forgot something very important just a moment ago, but shook it off. Kurama smacked her forehead but silently snickered as she sat back to watch the shit about to hit the fan. Sure. Come on in, Iruka-sensei. Please have a seat in the living room. Naruto replied as he stepped back to let his sensei into his apartment. As soon as Iruka entered the living room, his eyes bulged out upon seeing 10 very gorgeous and naked women standing in the living room. Naruto smacked his forehead with a groan for his short-term memory failure. The clones then realized there was another man in the apartment and they did what any self-respecting male clone transformed into a naked woman would do. They screamed in the most girly way possible. Kya. All 10 clones screamed cutely as they tried their best to run around and cover up their privates with their arms. For any observer, it would have been a very adorable and arousing scene to view. That was what Iruka, and Naruto to a lesser degree, felt as they watched 10 young women scramble and falling over themselves for cover. In the next instant Iruka was blown backward from a massive nosebleed and he crashed into a wall behind him before sliding down to the floor completely unconscious, a perverted grin plastered on his face. Naruto wiped a small nosebleed from under his nose before he turned to the unconscious body. Oi. Are you alive? On a side note, my new Oroku no Jutsu works awesome. He exclaimed with a fist raised in victory. The celebration was short-lived as he stopped cold when he felt a massive wave of killing intent from behind. Slowly turning his head around to see 10 very pissed-off clones looking ready to murder him, he let out a small whimper. You bastard! How dare you expose us innocent maidens to a stranger without our permission? Exclamation mark. We'll teach you a lesson, the twin pigtailed winner of the contest growled as all 10 clones cracked their knuckles. They then descended upon their creator to unleash their righteous, feminine, rage upon him. As Naruto was being pounded into the floor with punches and stomps aimed at his very sensitive spots, he had one last thought before unconsciousness took him. So this is how Ero Sennin feels whenever he's caught peeping. I always knew he was a masochist. Also, this is the weirdest fucking day I've ever had all my life, bar none. Next morning Naruto let out a groan as he slowly raised himself to a sitting position on the floor of his living room. Ow, feels like I've been beaten up by 10 women. Oh yeah, that did happen. Naruto grumbled as he looked around the room. His clones apparently dispelled themselves long ago as he now processed their memories. He let out a shudder when he went over some of the very female thought processes of the clones. Note to self, do not transform into a girl any longer than necessary. He was surprised to hear a groan from behind. He looked around to see Iruka still propped up against the hallway wall and he was rousing himself out of his nosebleed-induced unconsciousness. Smacking his lips, he glanced around until his tired eyes locked with a pair of deep blue eyes. Hi. Naruto nervously said as he worried about what his sensei would say about last night. He wondered if he would have to reveal the fact that he already knew a very advanced and forbidden variation of the Bunshin at the very least. Naruto. What happened last night? All I remember is coming inside and then I think something knocked me out. Iruka groggily asked as he shook out some cobwebs in his head. It was a prank that sprang itself without my permission and it went wrong. It knocked me out too. I'm really sorry, Iruka-sensei. Naruto carefully said, hoping to avoid any mention of his clones or the fact that they were naked women. He tensed up a little as he watched the scarred man concentrate hard as he seemed to be trying to remember everything about last night. He then gave up and shook his head. That's all right. I came here to check on you and it looks like you were just up to your usual stunts. I should get going and leave you alone for the day. See you tomorrow in class, Naruto. Iruka assured with a kind smile as he stood up to leave. Naruto escorted him out before he closed the front door and leaned his forehead against it with a sigh of relief. Selective memory loss. I would assume so. Imagine how a likely virgin like him would feel when he walks into the residence of an 13-year-old and sees 10 very beautiful and naked women standing in the living room. Naruto did an exaggerated, "that makes sense," shrug before going into the kitchen to make his breakfast. Some days later, "Oi, Gaki." A female voice stopped Naruto in his track while he was walking down a street with bags of groceries for dinner tonight. He turned his head over his shoulder to see Mitarashi Anko jogging up with a waving hand. He had to turn his head to hide a blush as he remembered that his new Oroku henge was based off this beautiful purple-haired woman's curvaceous body. He couldn't help but keep superimposing the image of that hinged body right over Anko's actual one. Her somewhat scandalous outfit didn't help matters either. The woman blinked in confusion when she got close enough to catch him blushing. "What's wrong, Gaki? Your face is red." Panicking, he almost dropped his bags when his arms flailed for a few seconds before calming down enough to reply. It's nothing. It's been a warm day, that's all." Anko frowned in suspicion as she watched the blonde keep glancing away in obvious embarrassment, but shook it off. She then displayed a huge smile. "Guess what? We gotta celebrate tonight." Naruto's confused, was cut off when she shoved an open book in his face. His eyes nearly crossed at such closeness, but he managed to make out a picture of the purple-haired Jonin with some text next to it. It didn't take him long to figure out what he was looking at. "Your bingo book entry. I've already seen it. It was B rank last time I checked." He commented with a frown as he moved his head to the side to glance at Anko, but she followed the movement and shoved the book back in his face. "Look again," she insisted with a prideful voice. Frowning and grumbling, Naruto did his best to see what he could make of the two close pages. It didn't take him long to see what was different. A rank. Let's see, assassinated a Land of Earth district governor, killed or crippled 8 Iwa shinobi in the process. 2 of them Junin, yeah. That'll get you, for sure. 300,000 Ryo, dead or alive, that's pretty high. That fat bastard was kidnapping women from other countries, ours included, for his own sick pleasures. I made sure he and his guards regretted every bit of it." Anko explained with a malicious grin, making the blonde shiver on the inside. "Well, congratulations are in order then," he replied with a genuine smile. "Only that reaction. You're gonna treat me to dinner tonight to celebrate this," she retorted in a no-nonsense tone. Frowning in confusion, Naruto lifted the bags in his hands to show her. But I've already bought stuff to make dinner tonight." "Oh, a homemade dinner. Thank you so much for this. Let's get going," Anko exclaimed happily as she grabbed a feebly protesting Naruto by his collar and dragged him away in the direction of their apartment building. Meanwhile, one young indigo-haired woman standing some distance down the street was burning holes into the back of the purple-haired woman's head with her glare while watching Anko drag her Naruto off as he resigned himself to spending the evening with company. Hinata growled as she watched her plan to run into Naruto and, innocently, asked to have dinner with him tonight go up in smoke. She knew he usually cooked his own dinner on this day every week and she found herself running into him once or twice every month in order to taste some of his wonderful cooking. Naruto always said her cooking was better, but there was nothing like getting to eat meals made by the one you loved. Now Anko was going to have that privilege tonight. She growled again and stomped off with the people on the street quickly splitting up to make way for her. They were terrified by the usually gentle Hyuga Hire's frosty glare. Later one day at a public park, Naruto-kun. "CC could you please get AA away from the TT thing?" Hinata stuttered as she stood trembling by herself about 10 meters from Naruto sitting on one of the park benches. Anko was standing behind the bench, bending at the hips over the backrest as she draped an arm loosely around the blonde's shoulders. She was fighting to keep her evil smirk hidden. The reason for Hinata's terror was slithering its way through Naruto's hands. A small purple boa constrictor hissed happily as the blonde scratched under her chin. "Why? This snake's harmless and fun to play with," Naruto innocently said as he held the snake up in one hand. Hinata took a fearful step back. Even so. I can't stand being around snakes," she stammered, her trembling pale eyes completely focused on her mortal enemy. Anko smirked mischievously, not being able to resist such a delicious opportunity, and whispered something to her pet. The purple snake gave a nod before springing out of a surprised Naruto's hand and landing a few meters from the stunned Hinata. It then began slithering toward the increasingly trembling and whimpering Hyuga, and it wasn't long before she broke and let out a shrill shriek. She then ran away at full speed with the snake on her heels. Naruto gave Anko an annoyed glare over his shoulder as she stuck a tongue out with a giggle. Hinata's panicked yelling continued in the background. Anko-chan. What's your problem with Hinata-chan? I know you sicked the snake on her. He demanded. You'll have to figure that out yourself, Gaki. It should be obvious. Anko teased as she wrapped her arms around his neck from behind and lightly pressed her bountiful breasts up against it. Naruto was stuttering upon feeling something blissfully soft, and she was enjoying teasing him so much she didn't notice the yelling growing louder. Naruto-kun. Save me. Hinata shrieked as she ran straight at the pair, jolting them out of their brief skinship. Naruto returned his attention in time to see the indigo-haired girl jump at him. On instinct, he reached out to catch her slender frame as she crashed into him, inadvertently straddling his lap on the bench. Her actions also knocked Anko away as she stumbled backward a few feet with an annoyed growl emitting from her throat. As Naruto began to make sense of everything after the collision, he immediately noticed his vision was blocked and he felt something soft enveloping his face. He also noticed his hands were grabbing onto something very soft as well. On instinct, they squeezed whatever were in them. He was surprised to hear a soft squeak followed by a moan and felt some tightening pressure around his head. It was when he finally realized his head was buried in Hinata's chest with her arms wrapped tightly around it and his hands were squeezing her butt. Aren't her breasts a little too big for an 13-year-old? They must be C already. So it isn't enough for our playboy to see 10 naked women the other day, he had to feel one up. Kurama interjected with an amused chuckle. Blushing, Naruto immediately let go of his hold on Hinata's butt to try prying her arms from around his head. He thought he heard a low disappointed growl from Hinata when he stopped squeezing her butt, but chalked that up to his imagination. However, she was keeping an iron grip on him as she trembled with adrenaline from being chased. She refused to listen to anything Naruto was trying to say as she tightened her hold on his head, burying him further into her chest. His tiny inner pervert and Kurama were cheering this development. Anko growled again in annoyance as she watched this scene unfold. Most of the times she met up with Naruto anywhere in the village outside their apartment building, Hinata always seemed to be there with him, and she found herself fighting a little with the Hyuga heiress for Naruto's attention. She wasn't sure why she was doing it, but she felt some sense of competition with the younger girl. She was hoping to scare Hinata away this time, but it apparently backfired on her, and she could tell Naruto was somewhat enjoying his unique position with Hinata at this moment. With a sigh, she picked up her pet that slithered cautiously to her feet and gave the purple boa constrictor a slightly stern look. Weren't you supposed to keep her away, my sweetie? She whispered in a half-annoyed and half-amused tone. The snake responded with a sad hiss as she bowed her head in guilt. Anko found this adorable and couldn't keep up her stern act. She smiled and nuzzled her cheek against the snake's head as she walked off, calling out her goodbyes, leaving Naruto to suffocate in Hinata's chest. Finally, after a few minutes of Naruto's muffled assurances, Hinata let go of his head, very reluctantly on her part, and he took an intake of breath. Geez, you have such a strong grip when you're terrified, Hinata-chan. He teased good-naturedly with a slight blush on his cheeks since he could still feel the softness of Hinata's developing chest lingering on them. I'm sorry. I know I should be better about snakes since I may encounter enemies using them in the future. Hinata spoke softly as she remained straddling him absent-mindedly. Don't worry about it. I'm sorry about Anko-chan. I wish I could say she's usually not like this, but it's in her nature to tease other people, to be honest. If you want, I can talk to her about leaving you alone when it comes to snakes in the future. Naruto offered. Hinata shook her head immediately. I need to get used to them, Naruto-kun. I believe Anko-san will be a big help with that if she keeps this up, so please just let her do whatever she wants. She replied with a smile, and then began to blush when she became acutely aware of the fact she was straddling the one she loved. She wanted it to last, so she tried not to call attention to that. Unfortunately for her, Naruto noticed her blush and he seemed to have finally realized she was on his lap. Stuttering in surprise, he apologized and gently moved her off to sit down next to him on the bench, much to her immense displeasure. He noticed her upset expression as she let out a frustrated sigh, and thought it was because he allowed her to linger too long in an intimate position with him. Oi. Why the hell did you have to break that moment up? It was getting good between you two. Kurama growled in annoyance. Naruto wasn't sure why his tenant was suddenly annoyed with him too. Enjoying it or not, I can't do that to my best friend. She wouldn't like it. Are you sure, Naruto? Have you ever stopped to think about what she actually wanted instead of just assuming she wouldn't like this or that? If she wanted anything, she knows she can just tell me. She could, but she understands that it's important you figure this one out for yourself instead of getting the answer from her. She has some amazing patience, because she's been waiting a long time for you to clue yourself in on a fact that everyone else has already seen. Naruto was about to quiz his tenant on what she was talking about when he was cut off. I'm not going to tell you any more about this, so don't bother asking. I'll give you a hint, however. Think over your relationship with her up until now and see if there were things you missed. I certainly hope the answer will come to you soon for all of our sake. Thinking over what his tenant said to him, Naruto took a careful glance at Hinata, who was still gazing away in the distance with a subdued expression and slumped shoulders. Going over Kurama's words in his head, he couldn't help but have a lingering feeling that there really was something between him and his friend that he was missing. A few days later, Naruto was whistling lazily as he made his way through the village to the usual training ground for his daily exercise. Naruto-kun. Gaki. He was stopped by two female voices calling to him from opposite directions. He glanced down one street to find Hinata walking toward him with a bright smile. Turning the other way, he noted Anko waving with her usual smirk. And that was when they noticed each other. Naruto had to sigh when the two females stopped dead in their tracks and began to glare at each other. He could almost imagine sparks flying between them. Hey girls, what's up? He asked tentatively, hoping this wouldn't lead to another competition for his attention like before. After staring at each other for a long moment, Hinata was the first to break off and graced him with a beatific smile. Naruto-kun, I was wondering if you'd like to come over to our compound and spend some time together. It's been a while since Hanabi-chan last saw you, too. Anko scowled and moved in close. Oi, I was gonna ask you if you'd like to spar with me. Nothing gets the blood flowing like some good old-fashioned slugging match. Naruto was about to retort that it was her who would do all the slugging since he could barely touch her in their spars so far, but Hinata cut that off as she glared at the other woman coolly with the perfect Hyuga composure. I believe I am the one who asked him first. Anko snorted. I saw him first. I have known him longer. I'm older, so he has to listen to me. I am his best friend. I'm his sensei. Naruto. Anko and Hinata were almost touching noses and looked like they were about to resort to blows when a loud bellow shocked them out of their argument. They glanced around carefully for any possible threat until they saw how Naruto was paling rapidly. In the next instant, a scarred man blurred into existence next to the blonde. I, Iruka-sensei. Naruto stammered as he tried to escape, only to nearly choke himself when Iruka snatched the back of his collar to keep him from running off. I finally found you, and don't think I'm letting you off this time. You scared 50 years from my lifespan when you somehow snuck that realistic tiger statue into my bedroom this morning. I certainly had a nice wake-up call when I thought a big cat was going to pounce on me in my own bed, he growled as he hoisted the flailing blonde up. Hee. You have to admit that was a great idea. Naruto shot back with unapologetic pride before being conked on the head by Iruka's free hand. Not for me. As punishment, you're helping me grade all of my class's schoolwork. What? That'll take all day. Should have thought of that before doing that prank. Now, march. Iruka ordered as he practically frog-marched Naruto out of sight, leaving two totally ignored women behind. They both blinked for a long moment, before frowning and snapping their gazes to each other. After staring at each other for a long moment. So, now that the Gaki's been kidnapped, I guess it's truce between us. Anko was the one to break the silence. Hinata nodded. I agree. Have a pleasant day. She replied neutrally. Same to ya. Don't be a stranger. They nodded to each other once more and stalked off in opposite directions. One day at the academy, the lesson's over. You're all dismissed. Iruka announced authoritatively as all the students in his classroom cheered upon being released for the day. They all filtered out, some out the door and others out the windows. Haruka was watching all of this unfold, his eyes lingering on Naruto with some suspicion. He was feeling a little antsy as there hadn't been a new prank from his blonde student in days, and it was grating on his nerves as he wondered when he was going to strike. As he watched Naruto walk out of the classroom with Hinata and Ino laughing about something, he noticed something on Naruto's desk. Curious, he walked over to the desk to find a folded piece of paper sitting on it, and he realized Naruto must have dropped it. With that thought, he immediately went out into the hallway to look for Naruto, and he was surprised to find the blonde already gone from the academy building within seconds of exiting out the classroom's door. Letting out a sigh, the sensei returned to Naruto's desk and picked up the folded paper to throw it away. He had often said that if there were anything left behind after lessons it would be disposed of, so it was no one but Naruto's fault for not heeding his warnings. Before the sensei was about to drop the paper in the wastebasket, he caught a glimpse of a set of numbers written on the outside. As he stopped in his track and brought the folded paper up to his face to take a closer look, Haruka saw the set of numbers represented a date in the near future. The day after tomorrow, to be more precise. Raising an eyebrow, he pondered over why Naruto would label a piece of paper as such for a future date. After quickly running through all the possibilities in his mind, he eliminated everything but one theory. Naruto was planning a prank in 2 days. Haruka let out a disappointed sigh as his mind settled on that thought. He recently taught a lesson that written information left anywhere, no matter how secure it was dangerous for a shinobi. He taught that it was typically expected of a nin to immediately eliminate any paper trail leading back to him or her. For Naruto to have already forgotten one of the basic rules of being a shinobi, Haruka wasn't able to help but feel disappointed in the blonde for not being on top of his pranking game like usual this time. With that thought, Haruka decided to teach Naruto a lesson by stopping this upcoming prank before it even had a chance of happening. That way, he would teach Naruto not to leave information lying around and also have the satisfaction of stopping one of his pranks, an occasion that was getting too rare for his liking. He then opened the folded piece of paper to read what it contained. Ideas for a new prank. TNUB Drek Viga Lutat Saksaka Vyun Kasi Duvedi V Vuit. Draw FYDLR Res C Bot Draw Hacked Tyo Dragek Ujan Draw Saksaka. YHT Finata Y Kamak Saksaka Evden Drek. Energy Kasi ECY Boo Boo Rate, so Naruto wasn't that careless after all. This is encoded, and it's at least decent. Haruka observed as he quickly ran through popular ciphers most shinobi used in his mind only to find no match. I'm not going to let this beat me. I'll figure this message out and stop Naruto. With that determination, he folded the paper back up and pocketed it as he moved to close the classroom for the day. He stopped at the library on the way and picked up several books on cryptography to see if he could figure out the type of code his blonde student used. Arriving at his apartment, he quickly set about doing his usual routine for the evening. After dinner and grading his students' schoolwork, he finally decided it was time to work on the encoded message as he took out the folded piece of paper and laid it out on his desk. He then cracked open the first cryptography book he grabbed off the pile of books next to him. Next day it was early in the morning when Haruka let out a frustrated groan as he leaned into his desk chair and pinched the bridge of his nose. He felt a dull headache coming on and his eyes were hurting and tired from so much reading. He allowed a loud yawn. Damn it. I still can't break the code. I can't believe it's already 5 in the morning, and I have to get ready in 2 hours. He rubbed out the tiredness in his eyes and stood up wobbling, feeling a little lightheaded from being up all night. He decided a cold shower would wake him up as he stepped into the bathroom. After getting ready and eating breakfast, he walked toward the academy deep in thought about what Naruto's prank was going to be. Even though he knew the day the prankster would strike, he had no idea of the exact time, how Naruto was going to do it, and where it would happen. Haruka let out another groan as he entered the academy. He knew he was going to be spending all day thinking on this. The next 8 hours of class did nothing to improve Haruka's mood at all. He hated the fact that he was more distracted by Naruto's coded message than he should have been. He turned in a less than adequate teaching job and many of his students grumbled about a wasted day, as they didn't learn anything relevant. That was a blow to his pride in his professionalism, and it didn't help he was very exhausted and irritable due to skipping sleep last night. To make all of this worse, Naruto did not even seem worried at all. Surely the blonde must have realized the paper on which he wrote his prank's plan was missing by now. Instead, he just spent the entire class day chattering with his friends and being his regular self. Haruka growled slightly in irritation as he watched Naruto leave with his friends as usual, still as carefree as he was when he came in. What was going on? Why wasn't he worried about his plan possibly being revealed? Was he that confident in his cipher? Haruka frowned at the last thought. He was getting worried that the prank plan for tomorrow would be huge if Naruto went so far as to write his plan with an cipher process that was extremely difficult. That concern was what convinced Haruka to pull out all the stops on this one. Shortly after leaving the academy, Haruka took a different path toward a plain and unassuming building next to the Hokage Tower. Entering and walking through the dull and featureless hallways for a short while, he came upon the office of one of his friends, Hokusai Koyo. Knocking on the door politely, Haruka waited for a moment before a muffled, "Come in," was heard. He then opened the door and stepped through into a small office to see a black-haired Chunin in a regular shinobi outfit sitting behind his desk, which was covered with papers. "Haruka, please have a seat. Haven't seen you since poker night last month." Koyo greeted with a friendly smile. "It's good to see you too, Koyo. I look forward to taking your money again soon." Haruka replied good-naturedly as he sat down in a chair across from Koyo. "Ha, that was luck for you. Anyway, I'm sure you're not here for a social call." Koko decided to get to the point of Haruka's sudden visit, though he kept his friendly smile. "I'm afraid so. You know about my problem student. Uzumaki Naruto, right? I have to say he's a genius with pranks when you talk about him. Especially when he took your place for the day. Which reminds me, how's it going with Haruno-san? I'm sure that was an unexpected result even for your little prankster." Koko replied with wiggling eyebrows. Haruka had the decency to blush. "Yes. I think he was surprised when he saw the two of us being friendly with each other one day at the academy. Sake-chan and I are making plans for our third date soon," he replied with a chuckle before continuing. "Her daughter's probably going to find out about me at that point. Hopefully Sakura-san will take it well. Keep me updated. Anyway, what has Uzumaki done now? I'm noticing you have bags under your eyes as if you hadn't slept lately." Koyo inquired with a somewhat concerned expression. "You're right. I haven't slept at all last night because of this," Haruka replied as he took out the folded paper and handed it to Koyo before continuing. "That paper contains an ciphered message that Naruto wrote. He dropped it yesterday and I spent all night trying to decrypt it with some cryptography reference books. I've had no success. And it falls to me, Hokusai Koyo, one of the best cryptographers in the village, to decode this for my dear friend," Koyo declared with some flair as he opened the paper up to read over the content. "Yeah, I think you can figure this out. Also, you still owe me money from our last poker game, and I'll let the debt slide if you do this," Haruka said with a smirk, enjoying seeing his friend grumble in annoyance at being reminded about losing to him. "Well, I would have done this for free because that brat's cipher is good. The fact that I haven't been able to figure out the key at first glimpse makes this a special one in my case." "That doesn't sound good, Koyo," Haruka muttered, a little worried about his friend's chance of unscrambling the code in time. "It's been getting a little boring here lately. Nothing like a challenge to revive the higher brain functions in my head. It might be just gibberish and this is the actual prank itself. I'd hate for you to spend a lot of time on this one if it's a bust in the end," Haruka offered, a little unsure of asking his friend to put in a lot of effort in this for nothing. "This is a real code. I may not recognize the cipher he used, but I can tell this hides a legitimate message. I doubt this is known anywhere in the nations, though. I believe Uzumaki actually created this himself. Are you sure he's not just an average student?" Koyo inquired with suspicion and Haruka shifted uncomfortably under his friend's questioning gaze. "His grades show he's directly in the middle of the field. Perfectly average in everything, now that I think about it." He furrowed his brows in thought. "I suggest you take a closer look at him. That Nara brat may not be the only one hiding his potential in that classroom of yours," Koyo advised as he continued to pore over the code on the paper. "I may have too. For now, if Naruto created this himself, don't you need the key to even be able to figure this out?" It would make the job easier, but part of our work as cryptographers is to find out the key for each different cipher. In addition to that, he made this an alphabetic substitution cipher. It means that it's plausible to figure out the key using the brute force method, as I match each letter in the code with the correct one by trial and error. That brat's good, and it probably would have taken you at least a couple weeks, but this won't take me more than a night. I actually think he left this out on purpose. I thought about that too. Why even bother encoding this if he's going to have to decode it each time he makes adjustment to the plan? Naruto didn't seem worried that I found his message when I saw him in class today. Haruka murmured more to himself than to Koyo, but his friend heard it all anyway. Maybe he's wondering if he left his plan out, he could risk being caught before the prank this code pertains to occurs. Make it a bit thrilling for himself. He offered. Sounds like him. He was complaining I was getting too easy to prank. Haruka grumbled with some irritation at his student's opinion. Koyo let out a chuckle. Anyway, I'm off tomorrow and I've got nothing to do tonight, so I'll be happy to decrypt this for you. Come by my place in the morning and I should have the code broken and ready for you. Sorry to dump this on you and thank you so much. Haruka replied with a grateful smile as he bowed his head. Next morning Haruka yawned loudly as he walked down a street toward his friend's residence. He did not sleep well last night. Despite Koyo's assurance of breaking the code, he wasn't able to help but worry constantly about what Naruto was going to do. Therefore, he allowed his mind to run a mile a minute as he went over what kind of prank his blonde nemesis was planning. With all of that on his mind, it was no wonder he slept only 3 hours in the past 48 hours. In the end, this made him exhausted, irritable, and nearly unable to think straight. Haruka hoped he would finally get an answer this morning before dragging his tired ass to the academy so he could effectively intercept whatever Naruto was planning. After having caught and gloated over Naruto, he would then dismiss the class early so he could go back home and sleep like a log for the next 24 hours. Easy to prank, my ass. Wait till I catch you and you'll see how easy I am to fool, Naruto. He thought with a tired grin as he dragged himself into an apartment building. After dragging himself up some stairs, he arrived in front of Koyo's door and knocked. A moment passed before Koyo opened the door. He let out a yawn as he stood in casual sleepwear. You're here, Haruka, and you look worse than I feel. Seriously, you look like you're about to fall over dead. Koyo said tiredly as he took in his friend's haggard appearance. I couldn't sleep while thinking about whatever Naruto was going to do. I think I'll actually fall over dead after I catch him, but it'll be worth it. Haruka replied with a half-assed smile. Koyo allowed a wince to appear on his face. Haruka, I broke the code. I'm afraid he's already successful. He spoke with some sympathy. Haruka's eyes widened then narrowed in confusion. Naruto did his prank. I haven't noticed. Nothing happened yesterday or even this early in the morning. He tried to make sense of what his student did. Koyo let out a regretful sigh and walked back into his apartment to retrieve his notepad with the decoded message. He returned and silently handed it to his friend. Haruka stared down at the pad and his eyes widened as he repeatedly read over the message. A long moment of silence passed between the two men before Haruka broke it with a low chuckle. It can't be, he played me like a goddamn fiddle from the start. He murmured dejectedly as he slowly sank to his knees. His chuckling grew into a somewhat deranged laughter as the pad fell out of his hand. As it landed on the floor while Koyo moved in to try to snap his friend out of his sleep deprivation-induced insanity, the decoded message was visible. Ideas for a new prank. Drop this fake coded message for sensei to find if found, then watch him spend the next day thinking over the code and write a useless message after this. Haruka sensei is a poo-poo head. Soon at the academy Mizuki stepped into the noisy classroom. The unusual sight of just the blue-haired assistant walking in was enough to silence all of the students as they became curious about the whereabouts of their sensei. Due to an unfortunate ailment, Haruka sensei will not be here today. We'll cover taijutsu today and the class will be dismissed early. On that note, move outside and get ready for practice. Mizuki announced before he walked out of the room with some students already starting to get up and cheering at being dismissed early. Hinata looked over at Naruto with a curious expression, while Ino regarded him with some suspicion. Anyo, Naruto-kun, was that because of the prank you said you were planning for today? She inquired with a look that told Naruto he wasn't getting out of this one. Ino backed her up with a look of her own as well. Though her cracking her knuckles was totally unnecessary in his opinion. Yep. All I had to do was write something in a piece of paper a couple days ago and let it play out. In other words, I made Uruka-sensei prank himself. He replied with a foxy grin. The girls raised a delicate eyebrow each at their friend's cryptic statement as they all walked out of the classroom. I guess that cipher you gave me worked very well. Naruto thought to his tenant. I wouldn't call it a cipher. It was actually a fake language I came across in a popular video game long ago. I figured since it's from a time long before this era but also somewhat easy to break with some effort, this language would be enough to keep that scarred man occupied for a couple days. Kurama explained. Video game. It's an electronic game you can play on a monitor using some sort of a computer. Since television was just invented once again in this civilization, that technology will likely be available soon enough. So you're saying this fake language was created just for a game? That seemed like a lot of effort. Naruto thought incredulously. And you played some of these games. It was a different time back then. Despite the humans' tenacity to destroy themselves often, there were long periods of peace in which humans had no major wars, so they found other things to do. It was boring for me, so I spent a lot of spare time in my human form playing these games to pass the time. However, you wouldn't believe the frenzy some of those humans go into over some games, especially ones based on warfare. Even in peacetime, they still wage fake wars in games titled Call of Duty and Battlefield, among others. Kurama grumbled at the end. Naruto hummed to himself on the inside as he thought over this before he blinked in surprise. You have a human form. You tried going through thousands of years as a giant fox and tell me how that'd work out for you with humans all around you. Of course I took various forms throughout the history to avoid being bothered. It's easy enough for me as a chakra construct. Before you ask, I don't feel like showing you now, so you'll have to curb your curiosity for another time. Oh well, not like it's important. If you say this technology you spoke of will be coming soon, maybe I'll be so awesome and legendary by then they'll make a game or two about me. Ha. A Naruto game? Yeah right. Kurama snorted. Omake number 1. Uruka's first date with Sake. Uruka was sitting across the table from a frowning Sake in the middle of a somewhat luxurious restaurant. The scarred man fidgeted as he nervously awaited the beautiful pink-haired woman's reaction to the truth he told her about their supposedly first encounter. He wished time would hurry, since each second they sat in silence felt like an eternity as he watched Sake contemplate what he had just told her. Finally, she broke the silence with a calm voice. So, Uruka-sensei, you're saying that when you supposedly came up to me out of nowhere and whispered naughty things, stuff that would make someone like Jiraiya-sama blush, into my ear, it was actually Uzumaki Naruto disguised as you? He let out a defeated sigh. He knew he could ruin this date before it truly began when he brought this up at the beginning, but his sense of honor would not allow him to lead Sake on any more than he had to. He resigned himself to the idea of her angrily leaving him at the table. Yes, Sake-san. I was out of the village on a mission and it was Naruto who transformed himself and took my place to cause some mischief around the village. Even though it was him who did this was my responsibility as his sensei, and I truly am sorry for not clearing up this misunderstanding sooner. He spoke softly as he steeled himself when he saw a flash of annoyance and dejection in Saki's brilliant emerald eyes. That's unfortunate. To be honest, I was actually happy when you came up to me and made me feel wanted and appreciated. I apologize for putting you on the spot the other day. It's just I was so happy at the thought of a handsome and caring man like you coming after a single mother like me. She murmured in a dejected tone. It's true. Uruka blurted out forcefully. What is? The thought of someone unimportant like me wanting to know a beautiful and strong woman like you. That was why I asked you out instead of just simply explaining this at the academy. Uruka declared with steel in his voice, making Saki's eyes widen. He continued, his gaze fully locked with hers. Since the first time I saw you walking into the academy grounds holding your daughter's hand at the beginning of this year, I've always thought you're a beautiful woman. I could tell you're also a great and caring mother from the happy atmosphere between you and Sakura-san. I find that to be an excellent quality because of my job educating and caring for my own students. Before long, I found myself wishing I could break through my professional attitude to get to know you on a more personal basis. While I am sorry for my student's behavior, I'm glad it ended up with us here. I could then explain myself properly so you would know exactly how I feel about this. He said with a warm smile. Sake was dumbstruck as she found herself falling deep into Uruka's black but warm eyes. Before she realized it, her hand instinctively reached out for one of Uruka's hands on the table and gave it a squeeze. She took a shuddering breath as she fought to keep happy tears out of her eyes. She allowed a beautiful and grateful smile when Uruka gave her hand a squeeze back, his smile growing warmer. Uruka-sensei, please, there's no need for that suffix here. Okay then, I'll call you Uruka-kun if you call me Sake-chan. She affirmed with an impish grin that drove Uruka wild on the inside. You should know I've had my eyes on you since the beginning as well. The few times I've watched you teaching your students, I found myself getting attracted to your firm yet caring nature, especially when it involves Uzumaki Naruto. Uruka raised an eyebrow at the mention of the blonde. Despite his ongoing pranking war with Naruto, he came to find himself caring for the blonde's welfare the more time they spent pissing each other off. I've seen how the previous instructors treated Uzumaki-san with indifference. They didn't technically do anything wrong but, because of his uniqueness, everyone could tell no one wanted to have anything to do with that child. It made me angry that someone who had to carry a heavy burden like him was so misunderstood. But then I saw how you actively put your time into paying attention to him and to try to be firm with him, despite it being a useless venture. Sake giggled cutely at Uruka's indignant frown when she made a jab at his futile endeavor in teaching Naruto some restraint with his behavior. I realized right there that you're very caring and would treat everyone, most importantly my daughter, with respect they deserve. You're also the first man since my husband died 7 years ago that I could imagine myself being willing to move on with, and I've been waiting and hoping for a private encounter with you someday after our first meeting. I suppose I have to thank Uzumaki-san for causing this to happen. Sake finished with a brilliant smile, in which Uruka returned with one of his own. They settled into a content silence, their thumbs rubbing each other's knuckles as they continued to hold hands on the table. I have to admit I'm curious as to why he specifically picked me to prank that day, though. Sake suddenly inquired with a cute pout as she furrowed her delicate eyebrows in a deep thought. Uruka couldn't keep himself from flinching in realization on exactly why that damn brat picked this gorgeous woman. Unfortunately for him, Sake noticed this and raised an eyebrow asking for an explanation. He sighed in defeat before proceeding to explain his reasoning. Oh, that brat. Sake growled, her cheeks red with indignation. Uruka had to work to stifle his chuckling. I can't believe this. He doesn't even know me yet he thinks I would be such a bitch that I'd make your life miserable if I latched onto you. On the other hand, I'm going to have a long talk with Sakura-chan soon about her obsession with that Uchiha boy and her behavior in your classroom as of late. I raised her to be better than this and she's too young to understand the difference between a silly crush and love. Sake finished with an annoyed pout, which made her unbearably cute to Uruka. He finally could not hide his amused smirk and he had to put his hands up in a weak defense against his date's annoyed scowl. I'm sorry, Sake-chan. I take responsibility for my wayward student once again, but you have to admit it made sense for Naruto to follow the old adage. Like mother, like daughter, in this case. However, it worked out the best for us in the end, should we decide to continue dating after this evening. He added the last part with a suave grin. Sake flashed him that heart-stopping impish grin he knew was going to be his favorite smile on this woman. Well, if I am to be such a nasty bitch, I have no choice but to make your life more miserable by demanding that you take me out on more dates in which we enjoy ourselves and have a lot of fun getting to know each other. She retorted with fake haughtiness before breaking down giggling. Her date showed her that knee-buckling smile and she knew she was going to regret sticking with her self-imposed rule forbidding naughty stuff on the first date. Uruka reached for his cup of sake and held it up to Naruto for inadvertently setting us up together. I look forward to getting to know you more. Sake picked up her own cup and clacked it with Uruka's, a happy smile plastered on her face. Amen to that. Omake number 2 for the Ika Empire. Naruto was walking down a busy street, mentally conversing with Kurama about random stuff. It was a beautiful day for a stroll with no cloud anywhere in the sky. He had to smile as he took in a breath of the cool and clean air. His relaxing day was shattered by a wail of pure suffering and anguish. New. After recollecting himself when he nearly jumped out of his skin in fright, he was worried about what caused such suffering. The voice sounded familiar too. He quickly jumped to the rooftops and followed the direction the scream came from for a few minutes until he came upon a pitiful scene. Poor Kakashi was on all fours in front of a local bookstore, surrounded by confused villagers. He was crying like a child, his tears and snot staining his face mask. On the floor in front of the pitiful-looking Junin was a certain orange book lying open. That was an unusual sight to Naruto since he knew Kakashi would have thrown himself in front of any kunai aimed for any orange book, and yet he was letting this copy get dirty on the ground. Oi, what are you doing, Kakashi-sensei? You're looking pathetic blubbering like that out here, and why is one of your precious porn books down there? Naruto pointed at the dirty book lying on the ground. He then had to step back at seeing Kakashi snap his head up at him with an angry glare. To imply that this travesty to the Ika Empire belonged to me is a grave insult. I refuse to acknowledge that book was written by the great Jiraiya-sama, he growled with newfound defiance. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows in confusion as he walked over to the book to pick it up and quickly scanned the first few pages. This is definitely written by Ero Sennin, he confirmed after a moment. Lies. Heresy. Blasphemy. Kakashi denied loudly as he broke down blubbering again. Not my problem whatever you believe. I know he wrote this because I helped him do some editing on this. Naruto retorted nonchalantly. Kakashi froze in his crying. What? Did you say? The silver-haired Junin's voice was quiet and calm. I helped him, you know. He was worried about his writing style being too far out of touch with the younger readers, so he asked for my help in figuring out how to change some of his usual terminology. At this point, Naruto turned his back to the older man as he talked. Kakashi slowly pushed himself off the ground to stand up straight behind the boy, his lone eye void of any emotion. Are you saying you're the reason terms like flower petal and honey pot have changed to, he struggled to finish, to slit and tunnel of love? Yup. Naruto confirmed, unwittingly putting himself closer to death at the hands of a crazed Ika fan standing behind him. And soft mounds and bosom are gone in favor of knockers and tits. That's correct. Naruto continued, not noticing the cold feeling of foreboding emitting from the powerful Junin behind him, scaring all the onlookers away. So, you're the reason for my precious Ika changing so much. Kakashi spoke in a sickeningly sweet tone with his lone eye crinkling into an eye smile. Naruto finally noticed the change in his sensei when he flinched and slowly turned around to see killing intent emitting from the large man in waves, and gulped. They stood staring at each other for a long minute. Naruto abruptly dashed off in an incredible burst of speed, but Kakashi was already blurring through hand seals. Kuchio's no jutsu, he shouted as Naruto heard multiple pops of smoke behind him. He took that as motivation to go even faster. He turned a corner and ran straight down a mostly empty street, straining his ears to listen for anything. At first, he was relieved to hear no sign of the man out for his blood behind him. However, that changed when he began to hear some rumbling and barking getting louder behind him. Risking a glance behind, he was nearly shocked into stopping upon seeing an ancient Greek-style chariot being pulled by 4 of Kakashi's larger summon dogs as it tore down the street after him. Each dog were wearing a menacing-looking Spartan helmet and barking wildly. Kakashi was standing on the chariot brandishing a long spear with a small pug named Pakun on his head, wearing his own little Spartan helmet. The man urged his summons on and they were catching up on Naruto quickly. Die for the ICHA Empire. Kakashi roared with a comically angry expression while he prepared to aim the spear at the retreating blonde's ass. Pakun barked lazily from atop his summoner's head. Naruto's screams continued throughout the streets of the village for hours after that. Regarding the new scenes, as you can see, they're not vital to the chapter, but I thought the transitions from tormenting Iruka to a park scene with Hinata and Anko, then back to tormenting our lovable sensei were too abrupt. I just felt those scenes improved the flow of the chapter better now. I wanted Sake to be a lovable recurring character in this story instead of being a vicious bitch that made Naruto suffer in every other fan fiction on this site, and I wanted Iruka to get lucky, and I thought they'd be an interesting match. I won't touch upon their situation too much in the future, but you'll be hearing about the couple once in a while. Please be sure to review when you can. Hope you enjoyed this chapter. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys liked it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like for more what ifs and support the author. See you guys in the next video.